my name is Lenore Ruth Beck Frimoth. I was born in Superior, Wisconsin, apparently in a snowstorm on the 4th of November, so that's about the right time of the year to meet a snowstorm in the north. I was the second child. I had an older brother, Stanley Charles Beck, and my parents were August Beck, and he never did have a middle name, and my mother was Ruth Emily Armstrong. They met in, I don't know just exactly where they met, but my dad was interested in going into ministry and had very little background on the workings of the church and this kind of thing. But he had a lot of help. A lot of people were helping him. And he ended up going to the seminary in Chicago. Moody
Bible Institute.
Moody Bible School. And somewhere along there, I guess I don't know how they met, although they were, they knew each other as children. My dad remembers meeting my mother when she was a little girl, and in this whole area and outside of Des Moines, Iowa, and it was an agricultural place.
Right.
And my father's family, my father's father was a farmer, and mother had farm people on her side too. Kind of interesting, but they found each other. And then Dad started his ministry in northern Wisconsin, cold area, and worked there a good many years. Lots of different little churches. He'd have 4 at a time, so that he would have 2 services, well, 1 service in the Sunday morning, and then he'd travel to the next little town and have services there, and then somebody would invite him to dinner. So he'd have a nice dinner and we'd break, and then he had a 2 o'clock service, and then I think it was a 7 o'clock.
Which denomination did he?
A Presbyterian. And so then at 7, he was a long way from home, because eventually we lived in Superior. And I don't know all the reasons for that. I think some of the reasons were that all of those churches didn't have what they called manses, houses for the pastor and the family. I guess I don't fully know why we moved to Superior. We were in a duplex kind of place there. But he'd finally get home. And then would go out among the people in these various places and make calls and do hospital calls and that kind of thing. I think he was a pretty effective pastor. I think that his roots were very similar to the roots of the people. And so he was able to relate quite easily. And he did this for many years. Mother, in the meantime, spent a lot of time being sick. I don't remember her being a well woman for many years. And I think that affected family life. So I'm sure that my brother and I were both influenced by that. Where do I go from here?
Well, I guess, what were some of your memories from childhood? Is that maybe some specific ones that
Oh my goodness, lots of memories. I remember living in the town of Solon Springs, Wisconsin. I was in 12th grade at this time, and so Stanley would have been in 7th grade. Both of us just loved that town. It was a beautiful place for one thing, and we had black squirrels. And they were, I think, a little bit larger than the squirrels that we have here. They were all black, many of them. Um, and we made a visit later on, years later, and there are still black squirrels there. And the lake is there, and I remember learning to swim in the lake. I remember the long walk that it took to get to the school. We lived on one side of the town, and the school was kind of out of town on the other side. Now, the town wasn't very big, so it didn't take a whole lot to do that. But he and I, brother and I, used to walk to school. And I had a friend whose grandmother began to do a hot lunch at the school.
Huh.
And she would ask families to contribute something. And I remember taking spaghetti or macaroni or something in my lunch pail to give to this grandma. And so she was there with this great big kettle. And there was a place upstairs. This was a 3-room school.
Mm-hmm.
First and second were downstairs, and third and fourth were downstairs, and then fifth and well, the rest of them, I guess, were upstairs. And we'd go upstairs to eat this hot lunch. Through the winter, that was really nice. The school, we had our own furnace in our room, and there was a protective apron around it. But when we'd get there, the snow was high, and we'd have boots, but the snow would be higher than that, and so when the snow would get into our boots, and so we'd get to school, and our stockings, these long stockings, would be wet, and our shoes were wet. So we took off our shoes and our stockings and hung the shoes on the floor and the stockings up there. And when it was time to go home, the stockings were dry. I'm not sure about the shoes. But we would get ourselves ready. This was the girls.
Right.
The boys, I don't know how they handled it. And then we would walk home. But we would walk in really severe weather sometimes. But we would finally get home.
What were some of the subjects that you excelled in? Or
The subjects, well, 4th grade, I think it was just the basics.
Right.
And let's see, 4th, I don't think I'm quite right on, maybe it was 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and then 4th and 5th. I don't know. There were just two classes in my room. Outside bathrooms, and one of the meanest things that would happen would be somebody would lock the bathroom on the inside and crawl out the window. And that was a problem.
Oh, yeah.
And that happened from time to time. Oh, dear. And then another thing, I got into trouble with the principal one time because, I don't know, I think I saved pennies. And during the recess time, I'd go across the road, because there was a railroad track over there, and I put pennies on the railroad tracks. That certainly wasn't an original, I don't think.
Right.
And then, because the train would come by, and then I'd go back and find those pennies, and they would be flattened and so forth. One day, much to my absolute amazement, there was a kind of an announcement that went through all 3 rooms, in which we were told that we could not cross the road and go to the railroad tracks.
In a school that big, I think you can think of.
Remember, she was a brilliant redhead, among other things.
Aha!
and curly, and totally out of control. I mean, the hair, maybe the girl too. But I loved living, and I enjoyed myself, and sometimes it wasn't always appropriate. So, but that was fourth grade. But then you see, we were forever moving.
Mm.
I had been in another school for, well, first grade. No. I have a sad, sad memory of first grade. Not for me, but for this boy that was in my first grade. First and second grade were in that room, and this was in Iron River,
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
Mhm.
What year?
Pardon?
About 1930, 31, something like that.
Yeah, I was born in 27. But in this first grade was a boy who was much taller than the rest of us, and he would sit in these rows that were for first graders, and it turned out that he was retarded somewhat, but there was no way to care for these people at that time. There was just no provision. So he was just in the class. And I don't know how many years he'd been in first grade. By the time I got there, he was there, and quite a large boy. And I still resent the teacher, because every once in a while, not a lot, but every once in a while, she'd have him stand up and read. But he couldn't. And so he would hold his book, and he'd look at the book, and look like a scholar. And he really played that part well. And then she'd say a word, and he'd repeat it. And then she'd say the next word, and he'd repeat it. And then the next word, and he'd repeat it. And then she couldn't seem to handle herself. She started to laugh, and everybody laughed. And I was incensed.
Mhm.
I was very young. All new, school was all new to me. But I thought that was wrong.
No, that's not right.
I
As a
thought it
child.
was very wrong. And one time, and we were in a depressed area, and some place, some organization or somebody would give us pencils with students in the school, and we would be given these yellow pencils, and they were a full-length pencil, and they weren't sharpened at the end. They had a nice eraser at the other end, and this was one of the highlights of my life, is getting these yellow pencils. And so, and they would come, maybe 2 or 3 times during the school year. I'm so proud. So in the middle of winter, we got them one time, and I decided to take this one home. This one was to go home. So I took it, I was on my way home, and I don't know where this boy that was the retarded boy, I don't know where he lived, but he may have lived fairly near us, because on the way home, I met him. I was kind of going through, kind of like a vacant lot. Snow was high, and barely plowing through it. And I met him, and he was crying. And so I asked him what was wrong. Well, he was taking his pencil home too, and it had fallen straight down into the snow, and he couldn't find it. And I helped him, and I hunted, and I hunted, and I hunted, and tried to help him find his pencil. I had mine. And we never did find it, I don't think. We never found it. It had just gone right. Must have been soft snow. And I felt so sorry for him. And I remembered how the teacher treated him. And I can remember feeling so bad about this, and that maybe there must be something that could take place moments of my thinking that there must be a better way, and that being more positive and trying to find answers, I think that was a big thing, and what I tried to do with my life. With that was way back. I never knew where he lived. I never, and then you see, we moved. So that was all over. And that was one of many, many moves that we made. So that was first grade. Second grade, we were in Superior. We were in Superior for second, and then I think I was in third grade too, in Superior. And then we moved to this beautiful place in Sony Springs. And we were there for fourth grade, my fourth grade. We weren't there very long. Can't remember what fifth grade was, but I don't think it was there. So anyways, this kind of moving, and I don't know all the reasons for the move, but Dad would, he would be approached to go to a different church, and why he felt ready to do that so soon in between, I don't know. That part I don't think I ever knew. So, and in the meantime, here was my big brother. We were really good friends, very good friends. We kind of needed each other. I think Dad was away a lot, Mother wasn't well. I think we learned to entertain ourselves at home. It wasn't what you'd call the happiest home life. But I think we made it as best as we could for ourselves anyway.
Did it have quite an effect on you? I mean, moving around a lot and making a new set of friends each school year or whatnot?
And you know, some of those friends I hung on to for years. One of them has died in recent years. Two of them have died in recent years. That was when we were living in Belplain, Minnesota. By this time we had gone from Wisconsin to Minnesota. And I joined the band then, played the baritone horn. And these other two girls, well, we were called the Three Bears because we each played baritone horn. And we would do little skits with our horns in various places in town. We were older by this time, and we could practice it, and then we'd go off and do things. Like for parties or, I don't know, can't remember what all we did that for. And then in the band, we would, at given times, we'd all three stand up and play a solo within the whole band.
Oh,
That was great living. Really, I enjoyed that.
that was in your teenage years or late? That was in your teenage years or late grammar school?
More like maybe junior high.
Right.
Yeah, just before the high school. And we I've lost both of those friends.
Might tell about, you had some real health bumps.
Yeah, health folks. I got polio along with a lot of other people. It was during that time when there was a lot of polio. And, but I got through that okay. I've got one leg bigger than the other. Not that much anymore. I think I had adequate care. Got over that. Before that, I got hit by a car. That was a biggie. And you know, when you're a child and you think you're doing it right, this was in Superior when we lived there, and there were safety zones that were painted on the streets. And so I went from the sidewalk to the safety zone, and I thought, well, you know, this is just right. I'm doing it right.
Good girl.
Yeah, no jaywalking.
I was walking, probably. Did a lot of running. I was always in action, kind of. But this older man driving his car, I don't know if he didn't see me or if he didn't have control of his car or a combination. Anyway, he hit me and it threw me pretty much out of the safety zone. And my father and mother were in a car waiting for me. I was going across. I had been up in the tree at home when they wanted to go and do some shopping. And mother said, I'm not leaving that girl up in that tree, the apple tree. She's got to come down. She's got to come with us. And so she said that she would give me some money and I could go buy some marshmallows. And I had to go across the street. Well, during that time, I got hit by this car. So my money went flying, and it was all little change. And I still see that money. And I jumped up and I started picking up the money.
Oh my gosh.
And then I got scared and I ran with some money in my hand. And I remember running back to the car, and I gave Mother the money. And I told them that I had gotten hit by a car. So my dad got out on his side, and he was going to go and see what was going on. And I crawled into the back seat. But that wasn't the end of it. You know, that went into a trial. This man, I think my family must have sued. And that became kind of a long process. But we hadn't moved away from there by the time that all got taken care of. Some of that I remember.
How were you hurt?
The worst part was that by getting hit, my head flew back, so I got hurt up here close to a whiplash. I'm sure I must have had a skin knee or two, but I was lucky.
Oh yeah.
I was very lucky. But this poor man, finally I jumped up and ran back to the car after I realized all that had happened. And in the meantime, he had gotten out of his car and he was trying to find me. He seemed to know that he had hit a little girl. And I think he had an accent. And he was asking people, where's the little girl? Where's the little girl? Well, I was
And the boobies.
But anyway, that became quite a deal. And I was in bed for a while. I remember the doctor coming to visit me at home. They did that all those times. And we were on my bedroom was on the 3rd floor of this duplex. There was a downstairs apartment, and there was 2 stories up. They climbed all the stairs and got up. And he had been told, I guess, that I was concerned that I had lost some pennies in that room. And so he had some pennies, and he threw them to me in the bed. And pennies from heaven was not popular. But I got over that. Nothing terribly damaging. So I was kind of tough. I got over that.
Do you remember what it was like when the United States entered World War II? What it was like in your town?
World War II.
Actually, how was it during the Depression?
Depression, yeah.
World War II?
I suppose I had to learn that we had a depression.
when you're a kid, I'm sure it doesn't.
I didn't live with that,
Right.
but we lived very slimly. The churches didn't have money, they didn't have, Dad didn't get much of a pay. He had 4 churches, so that he would go from, his Sunday was really busy. But those were all struggling little churches. One time I went with him on this Sunday morning, well, it was, the whole day. And I was pretty naive about it, and the day that could be, got through the first service, but I usually did get through the first service, got along fine. Well, then there was the second service. And one day, at the second service, this woman had invited Dad and me to her home for dinner. And the husband was there, they had a lovely dog, they were on a little farm, and there was this very big hill, flat at the top, very big, steep hill. And so, after we ate, this woman said, "No, I'll keep Lenore, and you can pick her up on the way home." And I'm sure he was pleased about that, and I know I was. By this time, I'd made a real good friends with the dog. And so, goodbye, Daddy. I was fine, but I was curious about that big, high, steep hill. So I went, and this lady said, "Well, children do climb it. If you want to climb it, you can climb it." She was just a really nice lady. And the dog came with me. And she said, "When you get up there, I'll watch, and when you get to the top," she said, "I'll come out and wave my apron at you." Oh, that'd be nice. So I got up to the top, and the dog and I got up to the top, and she came out of way down the sea. No. She came out, she waved her. The dog saw her waving that and left. Went down that hill so fast. He was going to rescue her, and I thought maybe the doggy would come back. So I went back down by myself. I remember that. It's one of those strange memories. But Dad came after the 4th service, sometime after 8 o'clock at night, I guess. Maybe this was summer, maybe it was going to get dark, it wasn't quite dark or something. And he took me and we went on back to Superior. I'm sure he lived in Superior back then. So that was one of those times. Dad and I were really good friends. That was a nice thing. And I was a real good friend with my brother. My mother kind of lived her own life. And she was a very good mother. But she was very, very conscious of her own physical problems. And she had them. And I think we were always very aware of that.
What were her disabilities? I'm curious.
I don't know, I think a lot of it was mental. I think really there was mental problems and
Depressed.
depression. I think she expected a whole lot more, marrying this minister, and that didn't pan out that well because he wasn't making any big thrusts in his ministry. Little towns, it was just always little towns. And we're forever up in the movie.
But ultimately, after he had died, she made her own way in Los Angeles
Oh.
and worked for a large church and it was very satisfying for her.
Yeah. And she had a new kind of freedom. She was the hostess for weddings, and probably made a whole lot more money than my father ever did, and saved it and used it well, and made a life of herself.
Okay.
Where were you when, on December 7th, 1941?
There's so many moves.
Yeah.
I have no problem with that.
What was the year?
41.
41,
41.
Pearl Harbor.
December 7th, 1941.
Well, we could have been in, could we have been in Belfast?
You were probably in Belle Plaine.
Probably in Belfast.
Mhm.
I was probably with these two girlfriends that were so dear to me. What do I remember about it? I remember when I came downstairs for breakfast, and Dad told me, and he probably told both of us children, and Stanley might have already heard. He may have had a radio by his bed. But it was totally a surprise to me. And, you know, it did change the life of a community. It just changed a lot of things. So, but I don't know how much it changed me. It was scary. I remember that. Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
What were things like before the war? Did the America First movement or any of the things preceding any?
Preceding that.
Yeah.
I think that there was, and I wasn't terribly political, so I'm not sure I followed that. My father did. He was forever we had a newspaper, but he was very interested in the radio, and he would sit right in front of the radio and listen and listen and listen. And we would talk about some of this. I can't remember, I think Stanley was very interested. And as he was getting older, he was concerned too, and he did have to go.
I was going to ask you.
And he deliberately, he finished high school, and he knew, we all knew, that the minute he got out of high school, he would go into the service, but not at his choice. He said, the government's going to have to ask me to do this, I'm not going to do it on my own. And I don't know, there were others that felt differently, but he didn't. And those were hard years when he was overseas eventually, and so those were hard times. But and Mother was kind of a basket case, even more so than.
Sure.
And I can understand that.
But he came back all right.
He came back. He is now dead. I'm the only one left in the family, of my family. And I guess, well, I was the last to join them, and I guess and I've got Bud and my children, but I'm very aware of that.
What year did you meet Bud?
I'll not help you at this.
Well, we married in '51, so I suppose I was.
Oh, so this is very important.
I'm embarrassed.
Shows the impression I've made on all those years. Oh dear. I'd walk for a walk now.
No, you help me. Help me.
And the redhead is blushing.
Yeah, right.
I'm all embarrassed. About 2 years before 51.
Yeah, in 1950, the fall of 1950 when we both
did that fast.
Yes, within a year, we were married. Yeah, within a year.
Okay.
And where was this that you two were going to school?
We met at the seminary.
San
At the
Francisco
San
too.
Oh, San Francisco. Oh.
Theological Seminary. Yeah. And I went in for the 2-year Christian education class, and he went in as a
What had persuaded you to leave the Midwest, or had you already been moved out?
And she was in Okie by this time.
I was,
You were in Okie by this time.
Oh, okay.
yeah, we were living in
Closer and
Oklahoma,
closer.
and I came out on my own.
Oh,
The family was still there. Stanley was married and living in northern Wisconsin, northern Michigan. And mother and dad, dad had a service up in Clinton, Oklahoma, and that's where he died.
mm.
He died there on a Sunday afternoon, preached in the morning and died in the afternoon, but he was not well. He had apparently, as a young boy, on the farm in Iowa, he probably had something like, what's that disease? Rheumatic fever.
Mhm.
And he didn't know what to do about it. He was just a young child. There was nothing to do about it. But he survived that. But I think that before he was an adult, he probably knew that he had some heart condition. And I think he lived with that all his life. And eventually it took him. Because he became quite ill and spent a lot of time in bed. But he kept up with his work. He would get up and get dressed and go out and make calls and work in the office or something. And then he'd come back and go back in bed. I wasn't living with them at that time too much, but when I was there, I would see this. But he tried his best to keep it going. But for this one Sunday, he got up and went over and ended church service, came back, went to bed, and while he was in bed, he had this massive
Mhm.
heart attack. My mother was there. She was able to seek help, and help came. But he was gone. We lived in Kansas at that time. And we would go and visit from time to time. And they came up to see us too. We lived in Spearville, Kansas. This was this your first?
This was my
this was
first
his
parish.
first parish. And we lived in this little house up at church home. And sometimes they came. I don't think that happened very often. We didn't do it a lot. This time we had our baby Margaret, and so we increasing our family, keeping busy, but kept really busy in the community and in the church. But so mother was there alone when this happened to Dad. Interesting. That was a Sunday afternoon, and she tried to call us and couldn't get through. And we went home, so we didn't got this call anyway. But when we got back home, we'd gone out to see old Mr. Fox.
That's where we were.
And that's where we were, way out in the country, and he was very old, and he was not going to be with us much longer. He had been in the hospital, and I think he'd come home from the hospital.
Okay.
And so we went out there to see him. We had Margaret with us. And when we got home, the phone almost immediately rang. And we were told that there was something wrong with our phone, and that they were trying to follow it and correct it. Didn't mean anything to us. I mean, we didn't know that we had missed a call. And then Mother called, and she said, oh, I'm glad it went. So it was her call that created some kind of a problem with our phone, I guess.
Well, I think they went to they also called the policemen in the little community we were
Sure.
living in.
Um,
And they were hunting for us.
yeah.
They went around.
And we were out at Mr. Fox's, and of course, that was probably the farthest point we could have
Well,
gone in the
5-6 miles out in the country.
out in the country.
Kansas.
So, anyway, that was how I learned that my father was dead. So then, and then of course Stanley and his family up in Alpena, he was a teacher in Alpena for years and years. And, you know Alpena?
I grew up in Michigan.
You were?
I grew up in Michigan.
Michigan,
I'm
all
very
right.
familiar.
You know Alpena. So, he drove down and, he and Don, his wife. So we gathered there to
Should we start with Bud's
Sure.
childhood?
I think I should stop.
Why? I'm learning things I didn't know about.
I was thinking that since we have you at this point married,
You want to go for
Step
marriage?
back for a moment.
go step back and
Step back into childhood. Okay.
Now I'll keep my ears open.
Well, yeah.
You might learn some stuff too.
My background. My father was Danish, my mother Norwegian. As I said earlier to you, my dad was first generation to this country. He was born in this country in Tyler, Minnesota. I used to say that his was an illegitimate birth, and somebody said, no birth is illegitimate. That's a good statement. There was a father. We have never learned who his father was. That was a best kept secret. This is how they handled it in Denmark. Mother came to this country, I think, to have my father. There have been conflicting stories there. But it may have been that she may have been impregnated here because she came to visit some of the family that had come over ahead of her. That was part of what was happening at the turn of, before the turn of the previous century in the 1800s. But he was born there. I have a picture of him standing as an 18-month-old boy holding a little American flag, which is kind of interesting. Then his mother went back to Denmark, and he was raised in Denmark, but never, I used to think that my grandfather's name was Creston Olsen. It wasn't. He was my father's stepfather. But my father was never allowed back on the farm where my grandmother raised the rest of her family. It was part of the way in which they took care of things in Denmark at that time, I think. When we'd been over there in 1977, we talked to some people who were in the city in which he grew up. By the way, my name could have been Ralhilly. Aren't you glad it's not? Frimoth is hard enough, but that's the name of the town that he grew up in. And his name was Elmer, and I became Elmer. And he chose a new middle name. Instead of being his name was Elmer Ralmkilde, or Ravenskilde is the way we used to mean, which is Skilde is in Danish means a little brook, and Raven is like a raven. So this was what it was. But the family name, when we were over there in 77, we found out that the family name really was my middle name, which is R-Y-T-T-E-R. Well, I've always said it's Ritter, but I don't have the Danish background to say, no, it's Rødger, something like that. And it means a coachman, a coachman. And anyhow, my father lived in Ravenskilde. My bestemor, which is a Danish name for a grandmother, lived in Korsalt, in an interesting farm. It was four-sided with a courtyard in the middle, and there were pigs in one, and I visited that when I was in the service. But my dad, who lived in town and was raised in town, my grandmother, my vegetable, took good care of him. He was raised by other family members, cousins or something like that. And he was probably one of the best dressed kids in school and this kind of stuff, but he was never allowed to go out. I don't know what ever happened. The interesting thing that happened when I came to naming my first son, my mother's father's name, my grandfather's name, was Christian Monroe Simons. And I always thought that my father's father was Creston Olson. So I said, well, when I was in the service, out on one of those dark nights, as an 18-year-old kid standing guard during combat, I looked up the stars and said, my first son's name is going to be Kristen, combining the two. I didn't want to be Christian. I didn't want that name. I didn't want to give him Christopher. And so when Chris was born, I told my dad, this is Kristen. He never said a word because, going back through the history, his grandfather was one of those who helped raise him, and his name was Kristen. Exactly spelled the same way. Last name Mortensen. And my grandmother's name was Elsie Mortensen. But my father never said one word about that. Never. I didn't learn a whole lot about my father. He was an interesting guy. He was a butter maker, but his skill was, I grew up in Clinton, Iowa, born June 11th, 1926, and he had a big, in the back end of his building in this town of about 25,000, had a churn, and he churned butter, and he pasteurized milk and all that kind of stuff. And they had a pastry shop, a Danish pastry shop, probably one of the biggest things that they had offering during my childhood was the fact that you could go down to the Sanitary Butter Store, that's what they called it, Sanitary Butter Company, and you can buy during the summer, you can have all the buttermilk, ice cold buttermilk you could drink for a nickel. I never have liked buttermilk. She would have loved it.
I do too.
Well, you have to have a good taste for it, but that was what his background was. My mother grew up in South Dakota. Her mother was probably second generation Norwegian. Her father came from Tromsø in Norway, way up the Arctic Circle. A little bit of a guy. I remember when his wife had died in South Dakota, he came and lived with us for a while. And I was probably in my early teens, and my dad asked me to go up on our little property we had. We had some trees that needed to be thinned out. Well, I was going to go up there and chop them down. And my grandfather came up, and he was probably in his late 80s. Went up there, climbed up this place for it, and there I was, walking on. He said, "Bud, let me show you." And that little wisp of a guy went. He'd been a logger in his early days. He actually was a farm implement sales dealer in the little town in South Dakota called Castlewood. But I mean, that kind of showed me a little bit of what my roots were. Had two sisters, both older. I was the youngest, like she. We were both the youngest, the last of nine. One is dead, the other is living. She just turned 80. She lives on the other side of town. She's lived in Portland a long time, as have we. Boyhood days, when I was during the Depression years, pretty much like Lenore said, we weren't completely aware of all that. We just knew that we just didn't have the stuff. In the process during the Depression, my father's store, his churn and pasturing stuff was on the first level on a cement floor, and there was a basement underneath, and it literally collapsed, and he lost his business that way. So he cut off the back and became a grocer on the front half of the building. I grew up working all the time in the grocery store, sacking potatoes, and sugar and running errands and doing all the little things that he didn't want to have done. He had other help. But that's how I began to work through the Depression. I would work from 8 o'clock in the morning, or 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. I would ride my bike to where the store was downtown. It was a mile or two each way. And I'd work at the store and leave probably 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'd earn a quarter. But on my way home, I'd sneak off to the drugstore and buy the latest comic book, slip it much like this, and I'd ride home, and I knew my parents knew that. I mean, I'd end up with 15 cents. Well, I thought you could pay $4. Oh, well, oh, to have some of those comic books now,
Oh,
yes.
yeah, it'd be worth a fortune.
Yeah, well, they were all those things. Older sisters, and they called me, of all things, they used to love to play, when I was still, I'm sure, before I was 5 years old. I was Princess Pauline, and they would decorate me up, you know, and they would drape me around. I was their little alive doll.
Oh, gee.
That's what girls will do to younger
The curse of
brothers.
little brothers.
Yeah, well, but that was part of it. Then went to high school in Clinton, Iowa. I stayed in one place. And you had asked earlier about, you know, time when the war came on. Since I'm a year older than her, a little over a year older than her, I was pretty much aware of what was happening. And I remember it happened on a Sunday, and we went to school the next day, and that was all that we talked about. And it was really very frightening. There had been people going off volunteering, but they had graduated from high school going on. Here we had some of the kids that I grew up with didn't finish high school, and they volunteered. They weren't as smart as your brother. I went through high school. The war was still on, and in 1944 I was drafted. I had tried to get into the Naval ROTC because I was a fairly good student in high school, and I had one of the things that we had a wonderful math teacher in high school, Mr. Herkelman. And this was at a time when, you know, if you got through just normal math, and there might have been some, you could take algebra. We had algebra 1, algebra 2. We didn't get into calculus, but we got into trigonometry and spherical trigonometry. This was really unusual. And he was very good. With that kind of background, I had a little bit better preparation for doing other than being just a doughboy. So I tried to get in, but I have very flat teeth. Why that would make a difference in going to a officer's train, I don't know. But it made. That's all right. I was drafted, went into, ultimately got down to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, into the artillery. But there I was able to use my skill because I had math, and so I was working with what they call the firing batteries, where you design all the things. And that's a whole other story. But that's where I learned about artillery. So by the time I was still 18, and they allowed us to go home at Christmas. That was my last leave, my home on Christmas. Then I went from there. I went to Fort Dix, I think, in Maryland or in New Jersey, and then I was shipped out as a replacement for the Battle of the Bulge in artillery. And so when we arrived in, we did not go on a convoy. We were on a big plane. Whatever the last name was, it was a Pasteur. It was a French ship, and it was a large ship, and so there were a lot of us on board the ship. And so we went over alone. And I noticed one day, we were going like this. We weren't going straight. Hello? Guess what was following us? Yeah. In fact, when we did arrive in Ireland, off the coast, between Ireland and English coast, well, we had destroyers going back and forth, minesweepers going back and forth. We didn't know all that. The scuttlebutt got down to you. So it's kind of scary, but here's a boatload, probably 3,000 of us on board. Well, you know, that would have been a horrendous thing to go down, and there were many that had. And we got into, I can't remember the port we got into in the west side of Scotland, but then we went down, and when we got into London on board this little doot, doot, doot train, you know, you always hear about them. It was a troop train, but while we were going through London, the buzz bombs were coming into London. So it was interesting. I mean, we just knew about it. We could hear the explosions, this kind of stuff. And then I went from there, we went over to France, and ultimately I got to my unit. And they came to get me. There were several of us who had been at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, were together. And we got over, and they came to the replacement depot place where we were to be taken. We got in a little, what was then would be the Humvee of today, except all it was just a four-wheel truck with a top on. And we couldn't find our unit. And so here we drive into town, we looked up on the hillside, and there were some German soldiers. They went that way, we went this way. We were all scared. You can see this is getting towards the end of World War II. So they were very much on the run. And so I finally got to the unit, and they gave us a choice of either working with the firing, not the firing, but with those who do the planning of where the guns are going to go on, and giving all the details in terms of the figuring out the trigonometry is really what they were using.
Logistics?
Yeah, the statistics to shoot the guns, getting information back from whoever the forward observers, this kind of stuff. And I chose to go on to do something I'd never done before. I worked with the wire crew. We strung wire. That was before we had enough radios, you know, to go from battery to battery and this kind of thing.
Huh.
And you know, I was active and I was muscular and all that kind of junk. I was a soldier, 18 years old, fighting a man's war. But I remember one day we were traveling down one of the autobahns, going from this point. They said, "Stop! Set up your battery. Fire right from where you came." That gave you a lot of interesting feelings, you know, because there were just pockets. This is all we were dealing with at that time. And but I saw enough stuff, and our battery was strafed by planes. We shot down one of the earliest jet planes.
Really?
See, jet planes came in very late. That was an experience to hear those things. And we hear them now, I don't think anything about it. Then, you know, what was that sound? And so we shot one down, and we went over, and I remember seeing the pilot, and he was dead, and it didn't burn up. It just crashed. It didn't burn up. And all the guys could do was say, "What can we take off them? What can we take off them?" Strip them of the ring. To see people who were left in the roads that you didn't have time, the people who were killed, and you see people whose heads became squashed like a pumpkin. And after the war, I went through Nuremberg and those kind of places, and the stench of war is just awful. I mean, there's no way one can tell, and not only human beings, but animals and destruction of buildings. And shortly after the war, we were allowed to go to Dachau. It was cleaned up at this time. But it affected me deeply from the standpoint, and I've talked to other clergy who came out of that era, who came out and said, you know, there's got to be a better way. Because I'd see these German soldiers that we captured, and you know, there are long lines of them going through. I'd see these stupid GIs going and swiping their whatever they could find. You know, I did some of that too. I mean, I didn't take it off prisoners, but you know, we found places to loot, and you know, this is one of the worst things that can happen. This is dumb. I kept the dumb stuff, gave it to there's a unit out here in Clackamas. There's a museum out there, and I've given a lot of that stuff to them. No longer around anymore. But that affected me a lot. So when I came back from the service, my sister had been away, by the way. She was in the service, and she found her husband Jack Burns. And so they'd gotten married. I came back. They were going to wait till I got home from service, and didn't work out. But ultimately brought me out here. So I'd gone to 2 colleges before I got out here. I was a college tramp. Went to a junior college in my hometown, Clinton, Iowa, and then transferred to Iowa State College because I wanted to be an engineer. Finished up that first year there and had to do a lot of manipulation. Then I came out to work on the roads down in Lincoln City area, except it wasn't Lincoln City at that time. There was Taft and all the other names of the cities there, and I worked on the highway there. And then I was able, with a little manipulation from my sister's in-laws, was able to go to Oregon State. And I finished up there, starting out in engineering, and ultimately going into, that wasn't going to work out because I didn't know how to do structural steel, and that's what I wanted to do. My math didn't work too well, and so I would have built some horrible buildings. So I went into education, so I got my degree in education with a math minor. And along the line, this was still in the back of my mind, there's got to be a better way. Education seemed like a good way to go, high school. But I bumped into 4 or 5 other servicemen, and they were all thinking there's got to be another way. And so about half a dozen of us were at Westminster House at Oregon State, which is a fellowship group, and we all went to seminary at varying time because we're different ages, and decided to go to San Francisco Theological Seminary for a half. And the first date, I was from Clinton, Iowa. She was from Clinton, Oklahoma. Let's go talk about it. Let's have a cup of jamoke and coffee. And the worst part of it was, I had a roommate who I had known from Oregon State. He and I were at seminary together. She didn't know which one of the 2 it was.
They walked the campus wearing the same kind of clothes, and they were the guys from Oregon.
Yeah.
And people have said, well, there's 2 fellows from Oregon. Well, I got this letter from one of them. It's one. And it was going to be very important to me as to which one it was.
She had other suitors there, and had some very attractive redhead and very personable and all the rest. But I took care of it in a few. One day there was good old Dave Schmidtkins, who was really interested in her. And see, the men's dorm at that time was up on top of the hill. We have a hill, and up on top of the hill were classrooms and a chapel, and also the men's dorm. And in the basement of the men's dorm was where we ate, the commons. And so, within 5 minutes of me hopping out of bed, I was down there. She lived in a dorm down at the bottom of the hill, and she had to come up this hill. So I'd see her within 5 minutes. Well, we would walk each other back down the hill. Well, David was walking along with us, and we were conversating, 3 of us walking down, and I just grabbed her hand.
But, yeah. David,
That was it.
Yeah, David was kind of trying to get in there.
The boy David was, well, there were a number of guys that were like me, single, but wanted to have a nice-looking young lady who was very personable. So that's when it happened. And within a year, we were married. Margaret was born there. My first parish was Spearville, Kansas, as you mentioned. And while in Spearville, we got a call from Stockton, California. One of my favorite teachers. I not only did my Bachelor of Divinity degree, which is 4 years of college, 3 years, and you still end up with a bachelor's. I went on and stayed on next year and got my master's in Christian education. So this good old fellow that we know, Dr. D.G. Stewart, wonderful, probably one of the finest men I've ever known, suggested our name to this particular pastor in Stockton, and so he pursued us very heavily, and so we came out to Stockton. And at that time, Martha had been born. I helped with this is very early, remember, Martha was born in 55 or 56, 55? Martha was born in 54.
She was born in 55.
one time we had 4 kids under 5, died another. I have to show you a picture of it. Her face was very bad, very haggard. But we went, he encouraged us to go to Stockton to utilize the training I had, so I went out as working Christian education. And it was when we were there that we learned that our daughter Martha had a Wilms tumor, which is cancerous to the kidney. And at that time, the only thing that you could do for it was X-ray, doing surgery and X-ray. And here she's 3.5 years old. Actually, she wasn't. She was 3 years old. And when the surgery was done, the size of the tumor was the same as her head. And so she had, her suture was all the way around. And then afterwards they did X-ray, was the way in which they tried to shrink any other problem. Well, of course, that wasn't successful. Within, what, not quite 6 months, 4 or 5 months, she died. That's when I was angry with God. I said, here, I've given my life to you. And yet there was sustenance, and the congregation was wonderful to us. They cared for us. When Martha was in the hospital, one of us was in the hospital with her all the time. I think day and night. Day and night. And, but our other kids had to be cared for. There was just, Todd was a little tiny baby. He was born in October, and this is April, March of the next year. Chris was running around, little 2.5-year-old, and Margaret was almost 5. And so the congregation just really took care of our children so that we could do this back and forth. But I also knew at this time that I needed to get away from that particular church. They were very supportive, but I was having difficulty with the senior pastor. He would come in while we were in the hospital with Martha, and he'd come and talk to me about work at the church that I wasn't getting done. He didn't know how, wonderful preacher, excellent organizer, all this kind of stuff, but his pastoral abilities weren't there. Well, it took us, what, 1.5 to 2 years before we left, and that was good because we had to formalize our own where we were and didn't want to just jump into anything. And ended up in a little church just across 6 blocks away from here, Kenilworth Church. And we were there 8-9 years, and then went to Sunset Church when it was a small church. This was an inner city church, essentially a city church. And we always thought of those out in the suburbs were our enemy churches because they didn't help us in the city. And so what did I do? I got called to go out to one of them. And they said, well, you might be our last pastor. Oh, thanks a lot. We're having troubles. So I was out there, and that was when Open Door, actually Open Door started before that. Open Door started when I was over here at this little church.
Is that under Rodney Page?
Rodney was, I had gotten involved with the Council of Churches here, and I'd always been interested in media. In fact, I did some television work in Stockton, little meditations at the end of the day. Usually they were face only. Well, I didn't. I brought in stuff to work with, and they, 4 cameramen did, what do I do now? Okay. But anyhow, some way I got involved with this, and Rodney was doing a program called Open Door, which had been involved for about 10-15 years by another guy, Eric Robinson. And then Rodney had for about 5 years, and it was strictly an interview thing. You sit down and you bring in some big deal, and when I watched him do it, I said, oh man, this is a snap. He said, you want to do this? Then I started doing Open Door as an interview, and I found out it wasn't a snap. You really had to be prepared. And I remember Gordon would punch on Gordon, or maybe it was Uncle Don. I'd come in and
Uncle Don, right?
Yeah, the production was done by other people, not just especially for just doing ordinary public affairs program. You don't need to have any. So all I did was set up the tapes, punch the button, throw the cue, you're on for the next, and then they'd leave. And here I was, halfway through, and I'd used up all the questions, 15
Oh,
minutes
no.
to go. And in the process, Hal Winston had come along to the station, trying to change it from an MOR station, a middle-of-the-road station at that time, to a rock station. And down at Portland State, they had a program that Hal had been working with, where they used music and interviews and stuff that they did. And he said, "Bud, you might want to give this a try." And out of it grew the Open Door medium. And then my big thought was, okay, at Portland State they use the Portland State students. This is going to be a program aimed at youth and young adults, and this goes back to my Christian education training, my education background. I don't need to be the guy in front. I mean, I'll help put it together. So we started out, and I would write a program, and the kids would write a program. I would write a program, kids would write a program. And I'll never forget, and Margaret has mentioned this, I think it might have even been at our 50th, that one time Steve Badan and Margaret, they said, we just don't have any idea to do. We had probably, a dozen or two programs. Why don't we just do a repeat? I said, no way. So I stayed up.
You came to the house kind of late in the evening.
Yeah.
That you were in bed, I think.
Could be.
And they were supposed to be getting this program.
Supposed to bring me the script. And it was all done, this was done, by the way, by seat of pants. There was no tape delay, so everything,
Oh, gee.
they weren't ready.
And so, and I think you said at one time, said, I kind of suspected something like this. So, Bud got out of bed, they left, Bud got out of bed, wrote the next day. Margaret has said on numerous occasions since then, she said, I learned a lot that night.
Yeah. If you're going to do it, do it. And of course, when I bumped into Richard Miller, he was perhaps one of the very formative persons in Open Door, in the quality of the program. He said, "Bud, if you're not going to do it well, you don't do it." He said, "Let's go back." And then we began, then we could do segments, and it was different from that. And it was an incredible ride.
Was it difficult to get involved as far as moving from church to moving to radio ministry?
Well, see, I did it both at the same time
That's
for
what I was
so
going to
long.
ask you, right?
What was difficult was that I loved the church work, and I loved the radio work, because way in the back of my mind, I think I've said this years ago, when I was a little kid, we had 2 radios in our house, and that was really something. One was in our front room. Of course, I learned from the cornucopia speaker. When the radio first came out, we had a big one.
Wow.
But we had 2 radios in our house. One in the front room, one in the kitchen. And I would listen to the baseball game, and I said, and listen to the Chicago Cubs, and they'd make a hit, and I'd run out in the kitchen to hear the hit, thinking there'd be a tape delay. But there was no delay. I could hear it twice. Yeah, but this is the kid. Remember, I was about 7, 8, 9 years old, and this is when I was listening. But anyhow. But I had an interest in radio all those years. And so to move, the hard part was leaving one, because one provided an income.
Right.
Open Door was going to be scratch, because we didn't ask for money on the air. We had to find money and people who would support us. So I sent my wife to work, and then I spent the next 12 years playing. When she went to work, and what you didn't hear was when she was a little girl, she always wanted to be a missionary to China. Well, she worked for SOAR, Sponsors Organized to Assist Refugees. The world came to her, and she found sponsorship for refugees. So what was wonderful is that she was responsible. We have a wonderful plaque hanging downstairs that's given to her for at least finding sponsorship for almost 6,000 refugees personally.
Oh.
But then when you think of all the other people that she made contact, probably 20 to 25,000. So talk about the world coming to her, and we would go to all these various New Year's Eve ethnic celebrations, And as her boss used to say, eat first, don't ask what it is later.
Yeah.
So we got into Afghan, Vietnamese, Laos. It was a rich fabric of life. And this is what if you would be out in our kitchen, you'd see a postcard we picked up at the World's Fair in Vancouver, which has ethnic people all across it. I mean, they're all drawn. This was across a building. And that's the way we feel. And the very fact that we went overseas, spent 6 months one time in Australia, and came back through Southeast Asia, and there's a picture in the hallway of us standing on Hong Kong Island looking down in Kowloon, and with our 4 kids. All we see is the back, and we see the plate, and it hangs on the wall, and Todd says, that's why I'm overseas in Saudi Arabia, Hong Kong, and on Vienna. I said, you started me on that tree. His kids are world citizens, and I think we taught our other 2 kids the same thing. Chris doesn't want to go anyplace. He's satisfied staying put, but Margaret wants to move on. And she was one of the first to go out overseas, because she was the oldest.
And when we mentioned the 4 kids, we took my brother's son. So we had those 4 kids.
4 kids, well, again, there was to Australia.
Had you all known any of your ancestral languages? Like, do you know any?
Very little Danish.
And is Beck, I presume, German or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which one will it be? Scotch, Irish, English?
Well, English, I think, is.
I rely on English.
Okay.
When we grew up in a Danish neighborhood, and my dad did not want us to learn Danish. He said, you're in America.
Mm-hmm.
And he spoke with a slight accent. He could never pronounce, he pronounced our last name differently. Where he ever got it, I don't know. We have lots of theories on it. But he would say Frimoth.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Frimoth.
I
And
think he was thinking of the TH.
Yeah.
That didn't come out.
the TH, is very difficult. THs are very difficult for Scandinavians.
Yeah.
But that was the way in which the family got it.
Do you know what your father's birthday?
Yes, it's January 17th, 1891. My mother was October 22nd, 1894. And your dad was
August 13th,
1894, wasn't it? Or
96,
96.
1896.
And your mother,
April 10th,
see,
7 years younger.
1904.
19.
She died at 95, at 95 years of age. Long.
What about your sisters?
My sister Gwen was born, I'm never sure, because she was born like your brother, born at midnight. Midnight hour, so, he had a better excuse. I think it's July 17th or 18th, 80 years ago,
80 years ago.
last year. So it's 23. And my other sister was born, Yvonne was born December 19th, 1921.
And this was all back in Iowa? Or?
I think she was born in Iowa. My sister Gwen was born in Iowa. She and I were born in Iowa. I suspect that she was born in Iowa. I can't remember. My parents came down from South Dakota. That's where they went. They went to South Dakota. But that's sort of the breadth of it. My one sister, Yvonne, died when she was 36, very tragically, very tragically. I don't think I want to get into that.
That's all right.
It was not, on tape.
Yeah.
The family knows,
Right.
and that's sad. Very talented girl. She was a professional model, among other things, in Chicago. Created a problem with her first marriage because her husband was jealous. Second one was much too old for her. He'd been married, she didn't know how many times until after she'd been married. I think she
Had she any children?
3 children, they're all gone too. All happened at the same time.
Oh, gosh.
And affected our ministry incredibly. All the deaths that happened within an 18-month period. Martha died, no, my sister and her 3 children, that's 4. A year later, Martha died, and then that same year, my mother died. 6 deaths within an 18-month period. I was pretty angry at the guy upstairs, or it's a guy, whatever you are. But the Lord wasn't angry at me. And I've had to learn that over the years. I didn't realize it. But it has affected profoundly the ministry I've had. I suppose in pastoral ministries, some of the best experiences that I was able to work with, too. Hospital visitations, and also handling memorial services with families, trying to help them through the experience. Pastors need to do this, but some are more skilled at it than others. I don't know how skilled I was. I felt at ease doing it. I wasn't. And so I suppose that's where clowning all came in. That's why we go to the hospital, clowning among other places. But that's a whole other story. You can't get on tape. You don't have enough. Your time is up.
It's pretty close, actually.
I know, just
He's
keep
a
watching
media
and
guy.
watch.
He knows these things instinctively.
Well, that's part of the timing that Lenore talks about that just seems to be part of. That was the interest in radio and all, because we knew when we were finished. That's a wrap. I think Robert and I had more conversations after everybody left that were deep and profound and wonderful. And then we'd both come back and say, well, how did that all, especially when we mixed it together, how in the world did this happen? And we would say, thank you, good Lord.
We still have 8 minutes.
You're what?
We have 8 minutes.
8 minutes. Well, how much more do you want from us? Go to the clown stuff?
Go through the clown.
Yeah.
Just touch on it. And you're absolutely right. I think there's probably at least another tape's worth of stuff that we could go
Oh,
through.
yeah. That's why I said
We
there's
just
no-
barely tip of the iceberg.
Well, remember, I'm 77, she's 76,
Oh, yeah.
we've lived a long
Yeah,
time, and
I
we
know.
spent most of our life together.
Mhm.
So we have lots
Oh,
of,
yeah.
Well, that's the whole
lots
purpose of
of,
this.
That's the whole purpose. And I know that it dredges up a lot of things.
Oh, yes.
Full spectrum, but that's what life is. That's
yeah. Well, I think some of the things that we have done that have been lots of fun, and hard too, were I did 2 pastoral exchanges, one to Australia, and we learned about Australia, and everybody chose to the Americans, the Yanks who were in town. We didn't want to talk to the Yanks, we want to talk to them. Whenever they say, have you been to? We say, how do we get there? And so we did a lot of traveling, and she was able, because she worked with Native Americans, with the Choctaw Indians before we met, and we were in Australia, so she was able to go out to the center. We both went, well, our family all went to the center, but then she took a little plane out to the Pigeon Jara people
Oh, yeah.
in the very center, and well, tell them how you got out there and how you got back.
They're the Aboriginal folks.
These are
Yeah.
Aboriginal, yes.
Yes.
We had made arrangements for this.
Yes.
The plane. I'll help you at this point. Okay.
Thank you.
We went from where we were staying, we got on a railway, and we took 3 different gauges to get to the center. Shifting trains each time, because the width of the train never changes, but down below it. And we toured around Alice Springs, but we had made arrangements in Geelong, where we had gone. There was a fellow a pastor down there, whose sister was a mission worker in the Alice Springs area, and the mission station of where she was. And so the only way you could get there was by the mail plane.
The mail plane, yes, that's right.
So and it
Boy,
went,
this is going way back.
yeah. it was only went to this place once a week. So we said goodbye to her. She went off
Oh, man.
and went out. We, in a little plane, and the boys and Margaret and I stayed in Alice Springs, and ultimately we flew back on our own. And she was out there. Margaret and her cousin David went out to the center to Ayers Rock, and they climbed Ayers Rock and came back, and then they joined us. Chris and Todd and I, we stayed around Alice Springs. We got back our slides, and we were showing them to the family first of all. It was great fun. And here was a picture of this lady sitting on top of Ayers Rock, signing in. And our nephew, who was David, Stanley's son, how did you do that? How did you, double exposure, this kind of thing. And Lenore said, no, I climbed it. And I found your names on there, that you had climbed it as well. So that was great fun. So that experience. And then on our way back home, we as I said, we went through Southeast Asia. And we flew over to Vietnam, and there were the battleships going on down there. And we dropped into Hong Kong and Japan and came back.
What year is
This would have been in 69,
this? 69.
1969. And she was on the radio in Geelong. I wasn't, but she was. She was interviewed.
Yes, and that was really weird because I was walking down the street. I knew it was to be on. I was walking down the street, getting home or something, and here was a woman with a radio, waiting for a bus or something. And there I was on the radio.
Tape.
She was listening to it. I didn't tell her. I
No.
just walked on home.
She didn't open her mouth. She didn't open her mouth because it would have been heard. They said, ooh. But they recorded her before and after, and just before we came home. We were there 6 months.
Huh.
Our second trip was to England. I had met, by this time I had met people in the industry. I was still doing pastoral work and doing this radio program. And there was a wonderful guy named Agnes Andrew, who used to be the spokesperson for the Pope when they described the midnight service out of the Vatican. And he had a place in Hatch End, it's in Gabriel's, in Hatch End, England. And we went, and I spent, 3 weeks there, and then went to, had a pastoral exchange in Sheffield, England, and we worked all of that out. And so, and the kids stayed home this time. They were high school age, they didn't want to come, and I think Margaret, I don't know, but the family that we exchanged with in the Central Reformed Church in England, in Sheffield, had 2 boys, 2 teenage boys. And so there in our house, you've seen the house out on Ash Street, there were 5 teenagers, plus the parents, and they were taking care of them. I don't know how that all worked. Nobody said a whole lot, but they managed, and that's all that managed. But it was a great experience. So again, that's another way in which Todd was influenced by wanting to go overseas. And Margaret did, when she went to college at World College West, she helped start a college, and it's now folded, but it's all right. They had, part of this, the thing was that you spent a year, or you spent a term in a third world country. Well, she couldn't find, her interest was gerontology. Well, there's no third world country that has a gerontology, so she went to Denmark and studied there, and that got her peaked. And so she's gonna go back over with her brother living in Vienna. She's going over to Vienna this summer. She and her partner are going to go over there, and they are going to use Todd's apartment in Vienna because Todd's coming home. Part of Todd's family will come home first, and he'll stay and meet them in Vienna, show them around Vienna, then grab a plane and get back over here to be with his family. So, and they'll spend about a month doing that. We have a crazy mixed-up family. We don't stay put, except for Chris. I don't think he'll ever move out of the house.
He is not interested in travel at this point in his life. But So,
What other question do you have, sir?
Actually, I'll probably fade out of this at this
Okay,
point.
that's fine. Just fade away. We, just like us, you know, old soldiers never die, they just fade away. Well, old clowns. We never talked about clowns, except that we were clowns. That's part of my name.
Mr. Media Boy here.
Oh, Ben, yeah, right. Oh, Ben never done that.
Yeah, hold on.
La-da.
there you go.
Okay, you wanted to know about clowning, how we got into clowning. Well, I have to jump back before I knew this lady. When I was in junior high, that's what they used to call it, at Washington Junior High School in Clinton, Iowa, they had I did a little theater work in junior high. And one stage program that I had to work with was, they had a circus. And my job, and being rather broad-based here, I was the guy who was going to crawl under the tent and get in so I could see the circus and the clowns. So that happened in junior high age. I suppose that may have had something to do with it. Plus the fact we had some people in junior high and high school who had a big vacant lot in Clinton, and that's when the circus would come to them, and that was fairly close. And circus were big deals when I was growing up. Plus the fact, one of the greatest clowns in circus was Tilly Sadler, and he was from my hometown, and he used to come to town. I don't think I ever saw him as a clown, but his parents lived just down the street from where I lived. So I suppose those are some of those influences. When Lenore was working with, when I left the parish and she needed money to feed us, she worked in, well, no, this was when we were still at, where the heck was this? This was when we were still here. You were working at one of the nursing homes, the Kearney Care Center. And there was a fellow who, I guess, had one of his wife worked at the center, and she knew the wife, and he'd been a clown. So, thinking open door, I pulled out my little woolen sock and a microphone and interviewed him. And we were out on Ash Street by this time. And that program earned the first Gabriel. And that meant going, I was encouraged by another friend of mine to go to NABSWAC, North American Broadcast Section, World Association of Christian Communicators, in Florida. Yeah, lots of them.
Yeah.
And because NABSWAC was meeting with the Gabriels, the thing that the Roman Catholics did. The Roman Catholics came to NABSWAC, but then they had their own afterwards. Well, we had Ron Gabriel, so one of the days in NABSWAC was for the Gabriels. And one of the people who was there was a clown, who was really making some waves. He'd been on The Tonight Show. He'd been interviewed on Time magazine. His name was Floyd Schaefer. And it seemed appropriate to go. And at the same time, at this conference, you remember when I'd go to NABSWAC, I think. And in the program, they had a section that you could take various courses, as well as plenary meetings when we had somebody. And he was the plenary teacher, talking about clowning and all this kind of stuff. We were all fascinated. So I learned clowning in a hotel room from Floyd Schaefer. And our first bit, this is very basic stuff, but we could only do, we'd have a couple hours, 2 or 3 afternoons, maybe not even that much. And then he'd teach a little bit about makeup, and then we'd make up our faces. But I said, now, you've got to practice it. Hello? I mean, we can't just stay in this room? So we went down, and I have a picture of that first one. We didn't bring any clothes with us or anything, so he had all the materials that we could use as far as putting on faces, but we had to improvise what we had. So I had my stuff, my old clothes that I had with me, not knowing I was going to do this. And I had a blue beard. I was a blue-bearded tramp clown.
Oh.
And so I went down into the lobby of this hotel. There was other things going on besides us. And I was down there trying to blow up a balloon. And of course, they wouldn't do anything. And this old couple, probably our age, came up and said, well, look at that poor clown. Can't blow up the balloon. Wow. And handed it to them. And so they spent time blowing it up. And I took about 5 steps over here, pulled down another balloon and played it. I was hooked from that point on. I came back from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Nice time to go, except I think in the 12, 13 years we went to Florida in November, early December, probably on both hands of the number of nice sunny days we had. It's a rainy season down there, and they really rain. But I came back home and said, Lenore, we've got to do this. And your response was?
It was not positive. What now? Something like that.
Yeah, she was a little concerned because I did creative things. I didn't just preach. We utilized people in the pews and all this kind of stuff. People used to say they didn't know what to expect each time they came to church.
And because we was curious what was going to happen.
They didn't know what was going to happen. But came back, and I knew that there was a fella here who lived near you, who had taken a course from Floyd. I'd read about him in the paper, and so I asked him, I said, would you come and do this for us? Do a church service. Oh, yeah. He stuttered. But Floyd Schaefer's form of clowning is nonverbal. Wonderful for this guy. Well, he came, he said, okay, I'll do it if you can get me either 4 or 5 people who will help, so I won't be doing it again, alone. So Chris, and another guy, and another guy. I think we had to have 4, but I needed a 4. What did Lenore say?
I said, let's get this. It was on the calendar. Let's see it through. I'll help you.
And then start packing.
Yeah, and then we'll start packing.
Packing, looking for a new pair of shoes. Well, I was a straight one. I didn't clown. This guy did his thing, and she got hooked. They were hiding in the sanctuary, and they, at a given point, when after he had made a complete change from being who he was to a clown, which we do all the time, then the other clowns popped out of places and heard what she was supposed to do. Remember what you were doing? You had a sack with candy kisses, and she was just throwing kisses. And Todd was in the church. My mother. And who has asked us to bring our clowns every place he's gone, including schools? Well, that's when it started. Well, she got hooked.
I did.
She was really hooked. She took some more training. There were some local people. There was a gal that came up from Corvallis who did some training. There was a little troop begun there. I was interested, but I would always be her straight person whenever we'd go out. And just before the last service at the church before I resigned, after I resigned, the last service, then I came out, and I was a crank clown, and that's when I really became a part. We became a duo.
What are your clown names?
I'm Wrinkles.
She said, she used to tell people, said, when I turned 50, I decided to be a clown. I said, honey, you were 49. And my name, I have 2 names. I have 2 clowns. The original clown that I used in churches and a lot of different places is a tramp clown. That's doulos. And it comes from a Greek word, doulos, which means servant. That's from the New Testament. That's the word, it means servant. So, but I also do lots of stuff. So that's how to certain people I explain what it means. To other people it doesn't need to be. And we have, we did workshops, and in fact we got one coming up that I talked to you about. And we've done clown training in Arizona, in New York when we were mission volunteers back there. We did a couple of them back there. We did a number of places that we clowned in New York. And our son, as I said, got Mr. Clown in Saudi Arabia before the royal family, among other things. Birthday party for one of the princess, a princess of the royal family daughter had a fifth, we think it was a daughter, had a 5-year-old birthday party out on the Wadi. And that was, let me tell you, that was scary. We had performed at the school, but you have to realize in Saudi Arabia, you're supposed to wear an abaya and all this kind of stuff. Americans didn't have to put the headgear on except in certain places they could get along. But if the skirts weren't long enough, you'd get whipped. And you'd get sent out, if you're a foreigner, you get sent out of the country real quick. Well, here we were going to go out to this wadi and do the thing we did at the school, which was we start clothed like this. We have appropriate clothes underneath. We take these things off and put on our clown outfits. Well, this meant Lenore taking off a skirt. And here are these loud shorts that she has on, swim shorts. And they were videotaping this, so was Todd. But here's this guy in a full outfit, white, great big video camera. And we thought, well, this is going to be it because we could be on the next plane home. And there he was, videotape, great big smile. She said, oh, okay.
When I threw my skirt, and see, I knew he was there, but I hadn't really looked at him. Well, here he was, videotaping, and I threw my skirt, and he broke out laughing. Oh, no. I guess we can see this through.
And we did, and it worked out fine. And so we have a picture out there. Todd was videotaping this, so he has that all on tape, as well as taking pictures. So, you know, there's an incredible experience that we never would have had. Plus the fact, it was one of our best gigs. We got paid $100. We weren't supposed to get any money for any of this stuff, so that's our under the counter. Wow.
Remember that?
Oh yeah, I remember that. We don't talk about that very often. Oh, I did. Oh well. We're out of the country. We'll never go back to Saudi Arabia, and the government can come after. Well, I think we might have declared it because we had a WD Productions, which is our little cottage industry. But we have had a wonderful time. And then when I had open heart surgery, who should come up to see us but not Floyd Schaefer, but Albert Alter, who is one of our dearest friends. He's a Roman Catholic who's been in, the story is a story unto itself, but he'd been a Iron Baby circus clown. And knew all these guys had wonderful stories to tell. And if you take the class, you'll hear a few of them. He came up to visit me in the hospital. And he's a mime to begin with, but he also is a clown, so he's verbal as well. And he came up to me, and he brought me a bouquet of balloons, when you still could do that. But they were deflated balloons. You know, they're hanging down like, I brought you a But everywhere he went, when he came down to I could hear the laughter. And so when I was in the hospital, I said, I got to do this in this hospital because they were so wonderful to us. And so we worked our way into all that stuff, and it's been 8 years. Within 4 months after my surgery, we were on the floor. And we still don't cover the whole hospital. We just don't have the energy. We cover the area where people are waiting for surgery. That's the reception area. And last week, when we were there, it was funny. We've been coming, as I said, for 8 years. And we were just doing our little thing. Here was a dad, about your height, with probably a babe in arms, I think a little boy, probably 9, 10 months old. First experience with a couple of clowns. Now I have a second clown called Dulots, called Zipper, that's rather gaudy. Have a bright yellow wig and an outfit, and very much a white face instead of the tramp clown. Tramp clown is kind of a downer in the hospital. Because my tramp clown is a sad face. But this way, we from our training from Floyd, see at our distance, and that little child had a wonderful first experience with clown. He won't be afraid. But while we were doing that, the other side, there's Wrinkles and Zipper. Hello. We went over, and here was an older woman. She said, "You visited me up in the cardiac ward."
Oh.
And I still have the pinwheel you gave
Will
me.
you give out?
And she knew our plum names.
Yes, she remembered. Yeah, well, we give out a little card that says what, welcome to the Order of Healing Hearts and Spirits. Wrinkles and Zipper the Clown, graduates of the cardiac and cancer wards. So they know their identity. We just leave those with them, and so but she remembered that. But the incredible payoffs we've had, and we do this voluntarily, we've had many, many payoffs. And one of the things that we did out of that, when I went to the gym, because that's part of my cardiac rehab, I met one of the teachers at the Providence Child Center for Medically Fragile Children. These are the children whose mind is probably 18 months and their bodies at the most, they're that old. Cerebral palsy, extreme cases of cerebral palsy. They might have the head of a 16-year-old, I think, with Tyler, and down to here, he's pretty much the same, but you get down here and his leg just, it's come up about here. We were over there, it's a whole thing, but the teacher for them, they have a teacher from Portland Public School, invited me to come to do that. Well, we had seen the children go through it, and the first feeling sometimes is, well, these are rather grotesque looking kids. What could we do? And we don't know if they see or hear. Well, we've been going there 7 years, and up on the shelf was one of them. That's an award we didn't go for, we didn't apply for. Surprised us with. It's a Culbreth Award. It's the highest award for volunteer work with the Child Center. And they surprised us. I've been sort of, this guy was talking to us one day when trying to get a lot of information just like you are here. But it's absolutely a beautiful one.
Yeah, I was going to zoom in on it. I was going to zoom in on it.
So you can see that.
See, he has all the magnification.
Yeah, if you can get down.
Yeah.
There you go. But at the gym, he kept asking me questions about, how'd you meet, how'd this all begin, all this kind of stuff. And here we are sitting at this volunteer dinner with about 400 or 500 people. I would say 400 or 500 people over at the Red Lion in Lloyd Center. And he begins to talk, and they were giving out awards. And we'd gotten some before. We got little pins and stuff for our ears. And then he said, well, this redheaded woman met this guy. See, that sounds familiar. And he went on and on and on. And then he calls up for the Culbreth Award. But with the two clowns, we knew by the end that what was happening. We were like Todd, kind of sinking down in there. And then they brought this absolutely beautiful, beautiful award. We've done a lot of stuff in Open Door where we submitted, and we didn't make a lot of them, but we got a lot of awards. But we had worked hard for it, and it was a spin-off. We didn't work for the award, but that was a heck of a good program. We'd have to choose which are we going to send, and Robert would work out to take care of it, tape-wise and all that kind of stuff. We would dub it off.
Oh, including the George Foster Peabody Award.
Yeah, and that's sitting downstairs.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was the first award we got. But the Peabody, I smile and say yes, but it represents what Open Door really was, because the program was produced by Margaret and Steve, and I sort of helped along the way and helped make sure it all came together. But they put it together, and that's Open Door. I mean, that's symbolic of it. So when I would not take and give that to the Oregon Historical Society, that's going to hang in Margaret's place when we move out of here, because that's where it belongs. But it was interesting, Bob Keeshan just died.
Right.
He received a Peabody at that same time.
Really?
The Today Show, when that was first going on, that was received one that year. Who's this Englishman who did the series for PBS on America? He's done a number of programs, but he received one at the same time. Jim McKay for the Olympics in Berlin, or Munich, I guess is wherever it was.
Oh, it's in Germany.
In Germany, when the Palestinians came in and killed the Jewish athletes. we were walking in pretty heavy country with that group of people. But as you know, when we went down to some of the Gabriel Awards and some of the other ones, I mean, here's Walter Cronkite. Margaret and I went back to Washington, D.C. to pick up that one because that's the program we did on mothers. I don't know if you did that program or not. Mothers? I don't think so.
What year?
Oh. Well, I have trouble. What year is this? 2004. We were amazed that we're in the 2000. Hey. But we went back there. He didn't show. Somebody else came for. A lot of these guys never show up for the awards unless they're really terrific. But perhaps the fondest memory we had of going to Nashwack was in South Padre Island when we met Mr. Rogers in person. And I have personal letters from him when we were doing stuff in New York as mission volunteers. We were trying to develop an older adult program. He had at that time Old Friend, New Friends, which was not a children's program. It was an adult program. And he and who was the great American actress on the stage? Helen Hayes.
Oh,
Hayes,
yeah.
She had people down. I remember one episode was in Mexico, and he was down there interviewing her, talking to some of the people that she supported. She was Roman Catholic, and she was supporting this mission state. And so I was trying to start something, so I wrote to him and asked him about, how do you go about this? Not doing a television program, but what have you learned? And he wrote me back the neatest thing, all printed, hand lettered, and several. And I asked him at one time to send a picture for each of our grandchildren. Has one signed by Mr. Rogers to Aubrey, to Toby, Mr. Rogers. Unfortunately, our son Todd didn't change the name, but decided to use Blake instead of Maxwell. So his middle name is Maxwell, so it's all right. The Maxwell for Mr. Rogers and Marshall. But he's just as everybody has said, he was just as real. And my fondest memory of him was we were all going to interview him at this down South Padre Island, again in the hotel. And here he was, going to come up to the media room, which was just another room. And there were a couple of young college kids who were down there getting experience in exchange for being at the conference. They were supposed to have it unlocked. It was not unlocked. It was locked. And here we were, a half a dozen people with our recorders, and here, this icon. We were embarrassed. And what did he say? Well, why don't we sit down right here on the floor? And we did and did a little recording, but then we moved. About that time, the two kids showed up and unlocked the door. And he was more interested in what you're doing. What are you doing? What are you doing, son? What are you doing? And at the close, and I think I still have this on tape, one of the fellows said, Fred, my young son listens to you, watches you all the time. Could you just read him for me? And Fred wouldn't say, well, this is Fred Rogers and this is, hello, James. He said, well, tell me about your son. And cover information. And then he in just probably 15, 20 seconds, he said, whatever the son's name was, you must have a wonderful father who wants me to say hello to you and to bring you encouragement. I mean, just so typical, taking time. All the time, John Costas, who was his pianist, who was sort of sheltering along, said, Fred, you've got to get to bed. We've got to go up to Oklahoma tomorrow. We're going to leave early. And Fred said, yes, Mother. And I suspect that's on the tape. I haven't listened to the tape since then. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful human being. And how grateful we are to this. And then we brought some of the people from, as we said earlier, we brought some of the people from Mr. Rogers' neighborhood here a year ago, or 3 weeks ago. And they gave us, we had such good hospitality with them. They gave us two of these shirts, and we just wear them every place. So when we go up to the museum, we'll just wear them and go up there very proudly.
And what have we got up here? Is this
There's a dog that has
Mobility
Hopefully.
problems. They can hitch up a cart to their hind legs kind of, and they can be mobile.
One
You
of
had a
the,
question?
oh, I was just thinking that, I remember back in '84 when I was still, I think I was still interning possibly, and I was volunteering with Open Door and looking for work generally. And I get this call from Bud. And he says, there's some folks that are going to be in town, and the driver's very sick. And they're from overseas, basically. And would you be interested in being a chauffeur? And so he said, oh, and they're going to have a gathering. Just come over to Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, and you learn all about it. And so, yeah, that was folks from the Soviet Union at
Oh
that
my
time
gosh.
that were high-ranking church folks that were on it was a peace exchange.
Oh.
And so that was, I just remember you saying, yeah, there's just going to be some.
My monkey mucks, do it.
It was-
Enjoy yourself. And did they give you a watch?
Yes, they did.
Oh my.
Yes, a watch from Russia. Yes, there was
Probably conked out to
Good.
no, it still works. It still works fine.
Oh, you still got it?
I still have it.
Oh.
I still have it. It still. I like it because it doesn't say quartz on it. But at KGW one time, Yakov Smirnov
Oh wow.
Ah,
was there,
yeah.
and he was there, and I asked him what the translation was, and he looked at it and he said, in Russian it says Timex.
Oh, what a memory.
That was about it. I just, well, see, and I came in and peeked in probably about '83, and you actually I just kind of peeked in through the door because Open Door came in after, and here you said, "Oh, come on in," and I was able to come in. I volunteered, and he put me in front of a microphone. And probably about a year later, I think, or was it a year later or so, that Richard came back, and Brian O'Neill was producing,
Not very long.
not very long, and then Brian Matthews, was Brian
Oh,
Matthews?
Brian Matthews did a little while.
Yeah, and I think Brian Matthews, between Richard Miller and Brian Matthews, that they taught me the board and
That's how you got your feet wet, huh?
that's how I got my feet wet, and it was a really incredible time with all of the volunteers and it.
Then there's John, who's now a doctor.
Oh, John Reichel is now a doctor.
Oh, yes, he's been a physician for.
Do you like his father? His
Like
father was
father.
yeah.
5 or 6. He lives out in Hillsborough, I think.
Wow.
Married into a family. I think he might have children of his own, I'm not sure.
Wow. He was
See him once in a great while. Interesting guy. Now, you two probably got to know each other. Of course, he was in one studio and you were in the other,
Yeah.
editing down.
But he was always so quiet and shy.
Oh, yeah.
He's very,
Still.
very shy.
Still, a little bit better now, but not much more. But no, he can't be. He's married and he's got children. You have to take care of that stuff.
Wow. Well, that's, and all of that, the studios and everything, I guess they tore out the works and they're just storage
Is that right?
places,
Oh.
yeah. That's what I heard. From a
I
friend of
wouldn't be
Chris's.
surprised. I wouldn't be surprised because, of course, they had three studios there,
Mhm.
down there, and then the other two.
Yeah.
And I remember when those were built.
Mhm.
Were you a part of that when that was being built?
No, I came after. I was there after. I've seen the previous studios because of that documentary
Mhm.
that you let me borrow. and when I was in television production. And so I had a chance to see the studios, which were over where the production and station manager, and I think it was right along that
Yeah.
wall.
That's right. Yeah. That was quite a time. I don't regret it. It was, I met some people who I still keep in contact with. In fact, with email, I have one of my real good, I don't know if you remember a guy by the name of Jerry LeCamp, who came out and we produced I think it was an Easter program. They came out and for Sandcastles International.
Mhm.
He came out and we produced it. We picked up segments from everything. And he came out from Cleveland. And I still keep in touch with him. So they're planning to have a reunion this coming December in Fort Lauderdale.
Wow.
And I see the NABSWAC as such folded about 2 years ago, but it really was dead about 7 or 8 years ago. Because our kind, stations don't want.
Public affairs.
Yeah.
Public affairs isn't
Don't get
mandated
started,
anymore.
yeah.
No, that was really sad.
The
So,
community is lost out, I think.
oh, well, we know that, but we knew that the moment that they changed from somebody like Dean, whatever his name was, or whoever followed him, who had grown up, being on air and working his way through. Mike Rivers,
Mike Rivers, yeah.
Mike Rivers, can't remember his name, is Al something or other, that's his real name. But he was, I think Mike was the last guy who had worked his way up through. So he knew what was going on in this, he knew about community, how important that was. And then they brought in some other people who were the people out of the sales staff. And they became,
BCs, bean
the-
counters.
Mm.
yeah, really were.
Mm.
And everything went downhill after that. And that's not just here, but in the whole
Oh, yeah.
industry. The whole industry
yeah.
is this way.
Well, technically, KGW was ahead of its time by about 3 years because talk format didn't take off
That's
until
right.
the early 90s. Yeah.
They were way ahead.
Yeah. They were,
And they had, but they couldn't make it go.
and now KGW is back on the air with Super 62
Oh,
Music,
music.
yeah.
oh, it's music now.
Yeah, it's music, but they're using that jingle package.
You're kidding.
They are using your,
I don't listen to it, so I don't know.
I've only listened to it a few times, and Bill Stevens does voiceover for it.
Does he?
Yeah, I'm sure it's just off a computer somewhere and loaded up, but it has the old Super 62 jingle package.
Oh, my.
That's in there, so it's very reminiscent. It's strange to listen to know that it's not coming from the 1501 Southwest Jefferson location. It's coming out of KEX or someplace around
I
there.
suppose Minka's programming that for them too?
It could be. It could be one of the many stations
Yeah,
that.
right, the four,
Yeah.
another four, yeah, four. 3 or 4.
Yeah.
4, yeah, 4.
I think there's 4 that.
I wonder if they have internet sites devoted to things like this, because when I get homesick for Michigan, there's something,
Sure.
old-time air checks, something or other,
They do. For
And there's I
The
remember all these things
Portland
30
Radio?
years ago. in
Portland
Michigan,
Radio,
and they
which-
have all that. It's really neat to find people who remember all the same things that you do.
Yeah.
And I'm not that old, but I mean, 30 years ago, it was a whole different scene. And,
Oh, yeah.
you know,
Tell us about Maria, I think.
yeah, well, for just watching everything change
Right,
in the
oh,
last.
well, you people have gone through an incredible change.
Oh,
We
my
can't,
gosh.
we can't keep up with it. We who remember the slower pace, it is really difficult.
It's
Really
There was something being passed around once, this is something like kids born in the last generation that have never used a rotary phone.
That's right.
They have always had cable TV,
Never had a TV without a remote.
Right,
Yeah,
it
right,
just
that's
blows your
right.
mind.
Well, we've got one sitting in her little 10x10 in there, an old black and white. And our grandkids will come, oh, it's bright, it's black and white. Oh, look at that.
Wow, people used to be black and white.
Oh, boys came to Portland for the very first time a few months ago, you know, we took them in there, and my mom's like, oh, thanks for making me feel old. Like, I remember all the stuff from on the farm, and this is, you know, I've got a bull like this. I'm going to charge $80 for it too, you know?
Yeah, just try and sell it to them for that.
Yeah.
Is there, just kind of to wrap up, is there, I know I'm gonna put you on the spot here.
Doody, 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 doody.
Howdy.
I'll proceed.
But if there was something that you would want to say to your children or grandchildren, something lasting.
Be who you are. Be who you are and develop it. Listen to others as they offer some guidance. But the good Lord has given you abilities and capabilities, and you've got a good head. You've got to live as I think there's a statement that one of the great clowns, Lou Jacobs, this is from Albert Alton. Albert asked Lou Jacobs one time, he's a Lagouche clown with a great big nose, when he was still in costume. Either Albert asked or somebody asked, said, Lou, what makes a good clown? Pointed to his nose and said, not this. This is what our message is also to our kids. Wherever the heart is located, here, and the Hebrews used to think it was here in the kidneys, or in the kidneys. Live from the heart. That's what the Christ has taught me. That's how he lived. He calls us to love one another as I have loved you. It costs him a lot. Life is not cheap, but it's to be loving. And as Dennis used to say, when I went into open door, left the parish ministry, he said, Bud, welcome to the desert. But remember two things. Be faithful to your calling, and you'll never be alone.